This is CounselCast, and I'm your host, Karin Conroy, your marketing co-counsel. In every episode, I discuss marketing topics with experts who answer your questions and help your law firm achieve next-level results. Here's today's guest.
Hi, everybody. I'm John DeMato. I'm a branding, event, and book photographer that serves experts who speak, coach, train, consult, and write books. And the main job that I do with them is help align their words with their visuals to help position them as the authority in their space of expertise in the eyes of those they serve.
John, I love that intro. I feel like there is so much there that we could just like slice that up and make a show out of it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I think that's exactly what we're going to do. So you're in luck.
Perfect. So we're going to talk today about visual storytelling. And I like that this is sort of the mantra that I kept seeing when we were I was being introduced to you and looking through your stuff. And I feel like those two words are really telling. And so the title for today's show is What Photo Strategies Will Elevate Your Law Firm's Brand? I didn't use visual storytelling in the title because I feel like we need to explain that. So we're talking a lot about photos and images and visuals and all of that stuff. And because you're a photographer, obviously that's what it all comes back to. But let's first start with that. What is this idea of visual storytelling?
So, visual storytelling is the practice of proving what you say is true based on how you show up in your photos.
Oh, that's so good. I love that.
Thanks.
Okay, so this audience is all lawyers, and that's the goal here, is to kind of build trust and show that what you're saying is true. Let's start with an example of how that is done wrong, like how an image is not showing, not aligned with the things that they're saying.
Right. Well, I would start with the personality aspect of these images as opposed to the activities that are happening within these images.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a firm is trying to create a perception of authority, of confidence, of trust, of credibility, and yet everything you're posting is silly, like smartphone photos of you guys hanging out at the bar afterwards.
Yeah.
That doesn't exactly. Now, while those photos have a place in certain respects, sometimes, not even all the time.
Yeah.
But the point being that is if you're looking to attract an audience into your world to learn more about how your firm can help solve their particular problems, you first have to get them connected and interested to do that. And one of the ways to do that is by sharing images that show the core values, the personality, the brand of the firm. And you convey that through the images in which you share them.
I feel like it's really interesting where you started in this description where it went to social media, because in my experience, we will put together like a great website or a marketing campaign or whatever. And we've got like the messaging and it's all pretty buttoned up. But then as soon as the firm decides to go out to social media, it's like their brain melts out of their ear and they decide like to just take an entirely left turn with everything that we're doing, because I feel like we all spend a decent amount of time on social media and we all have this idea of what that means to be on social media based on people in totally different industries doing totally different things. But it's like, okay, so now I need to dance. Apparently, like, what are you doing? Why? Where did that come from? And how does this have anything to do with anything? So have you seen this happen? And how do you address like how to have that consistent approach across all platforms, your website, social media, everything, all of the stuff that you're doing?
Well, the first step is to not wing it and hope for the best and kind of piecemeal it. To first of all, understand the value of having that compelling visual storytelling be consistent across all touch points of your online presence.
Yeah.
And that starts with being strategic. You got to map it out. how do you want to be perceived? What is the brand itself? What are the services? Show your audience of potential clients how the sausage is made. Get them intrigued and learning more about, the specific way in which you can solve their problems. And when you do that, you're giving them an opportunity to visualize what it actually looks like to work with you folks, as opposed to how much do you cost? And, when can you get started? And
how long is it going to take?
Right. So, I mean,
just the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
So I like to start with I use these two examples over and over when we're kind of talking through how things can be different with the brand. So a client of ours who did personal injury, and their approach was imageries and thoughts of kind of being in your corner and sort of boxing gloves and real their visual brand and their logo was bold colors and, dark, strong colors. So that's one example versus another client who is in a small town in Tennessee and they do elder law. And so their approach and their client could not be more different. They want this soft, compelling, personal, feel of being there, understanding, probably also not very tech forward, being more in your face. You can come in and meet with us and, that kind of stuff, as opposed to this personal injury, strong, guy who came with the images he wanted to use in the beginning were boxing gloves, So using those two, how would you tell if their images and maybe the kind of images they're using on their website and stuff are strategically effective? How could you kind of line up those two types of clients or projects and then say, okay, here's the right approach for these guys and here's the right approach for those guys?
Okay. So when we're talking about the boxing gloves thing, I mean, can I be honest? And
yes,
I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but it feels contrived. It feels forced. It feels staged. It feels wrong.
Yep.
The personal feel, that's what I wrote from that example you gave me from the small town folks. That immediately resonated. Why? Because when you are in the business of building relationships, long-term relationships, and that's what law is in this, it's a service industry, a professional service industry. The goal is always to be as genuine as possible and ultimately to make the content, make the stories that you share wherever it is online to be about how you serve, how you help, and to create that emotional resonance for people. Because when people are deciding whether or not you are the solution to their problem, it's heart and head, it's both at the same time. And by the way, I think I've seen some of that kind of stuff when I travel for work.
Of course. Yeah.
Or the other one that I've seen is in New York City. When you come off the bridge and you're into Manhattan, there is this gigantic personal injury lawyer that actually has his office in my neighborhood in Queens. And it looks like a NASCAR background with all of these different things. Now, he doesn't have boxing gloves, but he took the photo from a party because you could see someone's arm around him with the hand cut. It looks absolutely horrific, and it sends the wrong message because it feels forced. Because in his case, he's forcing credibility. I'm the best of this, and this, and it's just I don't even know where to look. But when you're talking about the stuff that comes from on more emotional based, that's the type of stuff that will resonate with more people.
Okay, so let's take those examples of the personal injury guys. And because there is, even though these two examples, the one that I gave you and the one that you see by the bridge, they're doing it wrong. Let's kind of unpack that and talk about, there is a piece of that people want to hear. It's the piece where I'm in your corner. I recognize this is going to be a fight and I've got your back. And it's not necessarily that soft estate planning approach.
No.
So how do those guys do it in the right way?
So I'm just brainstorming right now because you're just
Yeah.
giving me some juice to work with here.
Yeah, sure.
What I would probably say is if we're going for words that are around strong and dependable, reliable, confident, proven, the way
Yeah.
that you can convey that in portraits is in the way that you light the person, in the composition. Preferably a lot of the direct address portraits where the lawyers are looking into camera, the camera would be a little bit lower to add some presence, to show some strength in there. And what I would also say is it's important not just to use the lighting and the composition, but then it becomes a matter of them illustrating what dependable, confident, reliable looks like to them through their facial expression and their body language. And when you put those things all together in the melting pot, all of a sudden now you have something that's going to resonate with people in the way in which they intended, but not in the cheesy way that they executed it originally.
The only thing I want to underline there, because I feel like it's so true, is that the first thing that you said is that when we're talking about these words, and then you mentioned like dependable, confident, that's actually the first step, is to figure out those words. So that's where we kind of start. And I don't know if you guys sit down or if you kind of take the strategy in from, a strategist, but first you have to have those words. So you don't just go to your photographer or your branding person or whatever and say, okay, take the photos. You need to give them that direction and that strategy and that stuff that's already been thought out and outlined and said, like, our firm's strategy is XYZ.
What I would even add to that is it's incumbent upon the photographer to actually come in and lead the dance when it comes to the strategic conversation before any shoot. It could be me photographing a branding session. I could be shooting an event, a keynote, a 3-day or whatever thing, or I could be photographing a book. Does not matter. Always have a strategy call beforehand. Now with the branding session, the first 3 questions are, why do you need these photos? The second one is, what 5 words illustrate the perception you want to convey to your audience? And the third question is, what 5 aspects of your personality do you want to present through your photos? So I'm 100% with you. Yeah. Because that's the North Star right there.
Well, and that's it. I mean, those were 3 quick points that you made, but that's what you need to come to your photographer with is what is your personality that you're looking to convey? What are the 5 words of your strategy? And what was the first one?
Why did you book this session? And here's why that one is important. It's not because I'm assuming that whatever they say is only what we're shooting for. What I'm listening for is, where are the gaps? Because there's everything you said, and the 27 other things you never thought about, because this is not what you're an expert in. And that's why experts hire experts.
Exactly. And oftentimes when we're setting up a photo shoot, I will be having these conversations, and a lot of times the firms will say, okay, tell us exactly what you need, what photos. And I always say, so with all of these things in mind, we want to give direction. We want to be clear. We want to have the strategy, but we also want to leave a lot of room for creativity and freedom of the photographer. So I always say, you got to leave some space. So give them these directions. But then if you're in the moment and you've hired this photographer and you've brought them into your office and all of a sudden they're looking around thinking, there's a great thing over here, let them take those photos. Like, don't miss out on things just because you're being almost too overbearing in, like, a checklist of what you want.
Great minds think alike. I'm so happy that you just said that, because most people don't. Here's the thing. Granted, I am that person that will have the button-up itemized shot sheet of every scenario and then tell them what outfits they need, what props they need to bring, what other objects they need to bring. But 10 times out of 10 times, I will freestyle when I'm in the moment if I see something good. And it is important for that, because
it is.
Yeah, because you never know And by the way, it might not even be some monumental shift. It just might be a yes and to what's already on the list. But it's instead of having 3 types of portraits that you're going to get where you're looking into the camera. Ooh, I see that space over there. Go over there, take the jacket off so it looks different. Don't bring any props. Go stand over there. And then we're going to go to work and leverage that space. That stuff's important. Go ahead.
Let me give you an example of that you will appreciate of how this played out once. We were doing this photo shoot for a firm on Park Avenue. And we wanted to do some outside shots because they do a lot of international law and whatever. And we just didn't want to feel so stuffy. So we went out, not we, I wasn't there, but the photographer went outside to get some great lighting and whatever. And they're outside. And all of a sudden they realized that their location in the middle of New York on Park Avenue was actually a part of their whole story and how it's super important where they're located. So he shifted so that Park Avenue was in the background. So it's just a nice blur and there's some nice motion. There's just like a different, and you can see taxis and all of that in the background and the buildings, but it's blurred. Like the focus is clearly the portrait, but it's different. And people that have an office in Oklahoma could not have these photos. Like you can only be on Park Avenue to have these photos. And so it's an important kind of little nod to this is where we are. We know this is important to some of our clients, and we're just going to throw it in the background and have a little note. And if that photographer wasn't given that freedom to just shift, like the angle of where they were shooting over to this angle that was so cool, all of a sudden their photos look more fresh and interesting and modern, but they're still a law firm. These guys are still in jackets and, all of that. And it was such a nice touch that, and once again, that was a firm where I told them, give him some freedom. I know he's really good and let him do what he's going to do. And these will turn out great. So here's what we need. But then here's a big asterisk at the end. Give him freedom to do this really well.
Right. And all of that is to say that it's really important to understand who the photographer is that you're bringing in, that you not only know that they have the capability to work with someone like you, but they have in fact worked with people just like you recently. Yeah. They've done it well and they've done it over time because, if you get stuck with a wedding photographer shooting a law firm, you could run into some problem. Yeah, that's the thing.
We've had that. I've had that so many times and it's like, my nephew is a wedding photographer. And I'm like, okay, just because he has a camera and he's, taken some pretty pictures of a bride once or twice, that doesn't mean he can do this.
You're my new best friend. I really appreciate you saying that. I love that. And it's true.
Right. Because I get the same thing where it's like, we are coming to you because we're frustrated because our website's not doing anything. And I'm like, well, tell me about it. How did that happen? Well, my cousin's uncles, nephews, that lives in the basement threw it together for a couple $100. And it's like, okay, well,
you look like you're worth a couple $100.
Exactly.
And by the way, that is an absolutely critical thing to realize, which is, if you want to position yourself as a premium solution, you have to present yourself in a premium way. It's not just the words. It's not just the video. Yeah. It's also the visuals that complement everything that you're putting out there.
It's so, so true. But I think where people get it wrong, to just give people a little bit of, cushion or whatever, is that it's hard. And so the easy answer is usually cheaper and easier. And so people just kind of go with that because they've seen other people do that. So this is my transition into talking about stock photos, which I know is one of you.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
I know this is one of your favorite topics because you're like ready to jump in. So let's talk about it. Let's go into, okay, first of all, why do you have such a strong reaction to stock photos? I mean, they're photos. They were done in a lot of cases by professional photographers. Why are they so gross?
It's not that the photos themselves are aesthetically nasty, for the lack of a better phrase. Although I will say some of the acting in them are absolutely horrific,
so
and And it depresses me that a photographer had to actually live through that experience to photograph them. But that's a whole other conversation entirely. But really, when it comes to the actual audience that is purchasing these stock photos, the main problem that I have with it is it's disingenuous. It has absolutely nothing to do with the people that are in that boardroom, in that space, or a part of that company, whether it's law or otherwise, just stock in general. And again, if we're talking about building relationships, if we're talking about building trust and credibility, how the hell can you build credibility when you're posting a photo of like 10 people shaking hands and it's the most uncomfortable looking thing I've ever seen in my life? Right. Or the doctor ones are even worse. The guy standing there or you know, like with the stethoscope, and he's like, it's like, in what world does that actually look realistic ever?
Yes.
The answer is it doesn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It looks super fake. And then it calls into question your authenticity and you lose trust. And there's so many articles that I love reading about how stock photos actually diminish your trust when the whole point of this exercise is to build trust. And I wanted to mention, because we talked about this really briefly before we started recording. I had this blog post and I think I need to revisit it because it was so many years ago. I don't think it's even out there anymore. But it was 5 stock photos to never, ever use. And so I'm going to list what I remember the 5 being. And then I want to hear like what your 5 most hated stock photos are. So it was columns. And this is obviously for the legal industry, for lawyers. So columns, skills of justice, a woman with a headset, like on your contact page, do not have a woman with a headset. It's some generic, you know, it's columns, skills of justice, a woman with a headset, shaking hands, the generic shaking hands like you were just talking about. And I'm trying to remember what the 5th one was. But you can all picture these on these horrible websites, and instantly you start to question the value of that firm. So what are some of your most hated stock photos, John?
You forgot the business card transaction.
Yes. Where they're handing those.
How dare you forget that one? Oh, here's another one that's awesome. Hey, everybody, all 6 of us, let's gather around one laptop and pretend like we're watching and reading something and doing something important. Like, we're going to do a drafting session right now. Right. So come on over.
Yeah, because this is how it happens every Tuesday morning. This is exactly what it looks like to be in this office.
Actually, the counter to that was a couple of weeks ago. I actually shot a law firm.
Oh, nice.
And, a speaker
and
colleague
you did
of mine.
The 6 people around one laptop shoot?
Actually, here's what we did. No, actually, the way in the strategy call we set it up is I basically said to them, I'm like, well, how do you guys work together? Part of it was we work mostly remotely. So what did that mean? That means I took my laptop. I had them send me the Zoom link. I took the laptop, went into another room. All of them were on a phone or on a laptop, and I'm shooting the screen as everybody's talking. That's one.
Amazing.
Number 2.
So wait, really quick to go back. So when you asked, what is it like to work with you? Is this meant to convey their internal stuff or also how they work with their clients?
Both. The answer is both. For these photos, it was mostly internal for their website. They're very light on the social. That's just what their jam is, and that's totally fine. But what we ended up doing is recreating. Actually, I say recreating versus capturing real life moments. The truth is, while it was a contrived scenario in terms of being in a studio shoot, or in a branding shoot, what I actually told them was, work on real stuff. I actually saw what a drafting document looks like. My head exploded, by the way. I'm like, well, can you put some page breaks or something in this thing? I don't know how the hell you read that. It's crazy.
But that was another one I was going to mention in terms of stock photos that I hate is the pretend document signing. And the number of times I've looked at those stock photos and you can tell it's a blank piece of paper. It's like, come on, people, at least put some fake words on that paper. So I interrupted you, though, and you were telling me more because I do want to hear more about how this shoot played out. So you did the cool Zoom shoot of them on a laptop doing their Zoom thing, which that's a genius way of conveying this virtual experience. Because otherwise, what are you going to do? Take a picture of a bunch of people like sitting in front of their computer, which like you can't really explain what's happening there. At least with the Zoom screenshot, you can understand what's happening.
Well, here's the thing about that. I did actually photograph the two partners behind the scenes of conducting the meeting. And the reason is because they actually have a context in terms of how they want to leverage it with the copy to be able to visually punctuate that particular sentiment of the copy that's on one of their pages. Because this is, while it was an internal shoot of just the staff, the truth is this is how they conduct most of their calls these days with clients. So
but there was a plan, and it was like, okay, here's what we're trying, here's the page and here's the copy that we're trying to support. Now we need a visual for that, instead of just like, I don't know, take some pictures, we have some nice windows over here, I don't know, like there was an actual plan and a strategy.
Yeah, because after the virtual stuff, we ended up then doing different scenarios, like the drafting scenario that I mentioned before. Now, this drafting scenario was 3 people. They had all their stuff. They were really working. And the way that the person conducting the drafting session was going is it was 3 people, 3 at the edge of a table, starts with one person. They do their part. Then he turns and goes to the other person and they do their part. And I'm capturing literally everything that's happening in real time. Wide shots, medium shots, close-ups of each person, hands, details of writing, typing, all of these different things. Why? Because it creates an opportunity for a diverse collection of images that ultimately can be leveraged in a way to create compelling visual storytelling. And there is not 1 inch of anything that feels stocky or anything like that. Yeah.
So it sounds like those images, I'm imagining those being used when you're describing the firm and kind of on the all of the pages of the website aside from their bio pages. So how do you approach the profile photo and kind of presenting each of the attorneys or, whoever you're shooting, whatever their career is, but we're just going to focus on attorneys, obviously. How do you approach that in a different way than those first shoots and those first photos that you were describing, where it's more about like that story of the firm? Now we're kind of saying the story of these individuals.
The way that I do that is, well, first of all, in the strategy call, we determine either they're going to go for the traditional headshot, the tightly cropped frame shot, kind of like the frame that we have here, or if they want something wider. The partners wanted tight headshots. The second piece was, now normally I hate shooting anything that looks like it was taken in a studio.
Like a school classroom photo.
I mean, that's how I started out as a headshot photographer and have taken thousands of those, and I'm kind of over it. But the challenge was that not everyone was there, and we need to future-proof how these images are going to look. Therefore, what I did is 2 things. 1, shot everybody with the same framing against a plain background. And then I also then went around and shot different, what we call background plates, which is essentially the out of focus elements throughout the co-working space in which we shot. I gave them about a dozen options. They can play with it and do whatever they want. The other aspect to that is that, you don't want them to just stand there and look all angry and upset. So what I ended up doing, that's when the directing the client piece comes in, where there's, while I knew 2 of them, from one of them I've known for years, his partner I just met, but we had a bit of a rapport. And within the first 10 minutes of me talking to everybody, I kind of got a sense of their personalities. So I kind of leveraged that intelligence while they were standing in front of the camera and kind of saying some stuff to keep them engaged, to get them to move their eyes, eyebrows, and mouth around, to give them a variation of confident, approachable, likable, and trustworthy type expressions that fall within the scope of their actual personality, while also tying back to the brand overall itself.
I love that the description of kind of making their face move. So, because I feel like when people are uncomfortable, And, in a photo shoot, especially if other people are standing around, it can be sort of awkward and uncomfortable that you kind of have to get them to sort of break that tension. But so I wanted to go back though, because you mentioned a minute ago about how if it was up to you, you wouldn't do that tight headshot, that sort of studio looking, whatever. And once again, for us, I always ask for both, so if we're going to go and do this, I want to have options. And I like to have on websites, I like to have a few different shots of each person because once again, it tells that story. It feels more like you're getting more personality. But why do you like to have, if it's up to you, would you rather have a wider shot with more of their body in it?
The truth is, I'm with you, actually. The way you just described it is exactly how I run all of my branding sessions. The thing about it is, if the client is not interested in having more variety, then okay, we'll focus on the stuff that you deem more important, but it's something that is addressed in the beginning, because I did ask them, do you want variations of other portraits? And they said our time would be better spent during that half-day session capturing the behind-the-scenes, the fly-on-the-wall experience of all of the different, aside from the drafting and the virtual meeting. I also did a whiteboard session by one of the partners doing his thing with everybody watching. Those photos carried more value to them in that moment for this time in terms of how they're going to leverage them in their strategy, their marketing strategy. So we just roll with it.
That makes perfect sense. And once again, comes back to that initial strategy session that you're having, because I was just thinking of two different examples. There's one firm that we work with, and their goal is to grow exponentially their team, not to grow their clients necessarily, because the team brings a lot of clients typically. So their huge focus was on the parts that describe the firm, why you would want to work here, that kind of behind the scenes description that you were talking about. And so they would have wanted a photo shoot like what you were describing, telling about the firm and all the cool things and the whatever, all of that stuff. As opposed to, we've worked with firms where there's a couple named partners who are very well known. And so like they may be out doing PR and, showing up on the news channels or whatever. And people are searching for those guys' names. And so in those cases, we're going to focus heavily on the bio pages and the profile and showing those guys and probably having them on the homepage and all of that stuff. So once again, it just keeps coming back to the strategy. And if you don't have that dialed in, it's going to be a mess.
Not only is it going to be a mess, but there is a good chance that you're going to have to pay for a triage photo session to be able to fill in the holes. Yeah, because and the reason why I know that is because I've been that person to have to do that.
Same. We've come in all the time and have to redo it. And it's like, here's what you did wrong. Yeah, but it's true. Yeah. And so, it's like laying the foundation for a house. If you've cracked foundation or lack of foundation, if you don't have that strategy, then you're going to have to tear down the house and build it again. Like it's just going to be, it's going to fall apart. It's going to be a mess. So it's time for the book review. And our website has a collection of all the books that each of our guests have suggested so that you can kind of take away some thoughts and maybe go and read a great book that might be compelling along these lines. So John, what's the book that you wanted to recommend to the audience?
The book that I want to recommend actually is not about visual storytelling, but it is from a colleague and a very good friend of mine that I work with. His name is Phil Jones, and the book is called Exactly What to Say. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind it is, instead of counting your conversations, it's about making your conversations count by being more purposeful and understanding, that the person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. Curiosity is the fuel of great conversation. And,
I love that.
People do things for themselves and not for their own reasons and not for yours. And the big one, the worst time to think about what you're going to say is in the moment that you're saying it.
It's so true.
So that's why I'm glad. And for that one, that corner, those are the four cornerstones of what that book is about. And that particular one, I'm thinking to myself now, I'm like, I am glad that we went over the book thing before we got on this, because now I knew what I was going to say, and I wasn't going to go, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what book.
It was a really good book. I liked it a lot. It was awesome. You should read it.
I have to say, though, it is a transformational book for those that are, I mean, and it's not just applied to sales and business. It is applied to all aspects of life, and it's really amazing.
So I do think it ties individual storytelling, though, because we're still saying something, and it's just more complex because we figured out, first you have to figure out what you're going to say, like you were saying, and that goes back to that strategy. And then you have to figure out how to convey that visually. So it's more complex than just your word strategy, because that's the beginning stage one of that whole plan. So I do think it ties in, like, once again, make a plan. Let's sit down and think about this and do it well. And when you do, what you get in the results is so much better. And you can look at it. And I love like before and afters for this, because it's like, oh my gosh, no question. That just blew it out of the water.
I mean, the more prepared you are for your session, the less worried you're going to be going into it. And the opportunity for you to be more present and open to the direction of the photographer goes up dramatically. And that alone will help you be able to get photos that when you and the team look at them, you know, you say to yourself, you know what? I recognize that person, and I'm proud to have these images, and I want them out there to help tell our story visually.
Yeah. Plus, there's just a level of confidence that you're going to have where you're going in feeling like, okay, I've got this. It's going to be killer. And like that is going to come across in your face if the opposite is the scenario where you're like, I wish I had put a little more thought into this, and like all of a sudden, like, it's on your face when people are taking pictures of you.
It sure is. It sure is. And those photos end up in the garbage, but that's okay. I mean.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Action items. So this is a new kind of section of the show that I'm adding, that where I really want people at the end of the show, after they've been listening to all of us just kind of yammer on, to have one or two things to walk away with and think about, I need to do this and this as a result of listening to this show. What's a thing or two that people should think about actually doing based on everything we've talked about?
Okay, so when you just asked me that question, I wrote down perception and personality. I think that the biggest thing that anyone listening to this right now can do in terms of seeing where they're at, in terms of how they're putting themselves out into the world, is to look at all of the photos that are on your website. Look at all the photos that you're using. If you have a public presence and you promote yourself on podcasts, like you were talking about those two more celebrity driven or famous lawyers you were talking about.
Yeah.
Like if you're that type of person that's public facing, look at your media kit, see what your images look like. Look at your social profile, your banners, all of that stuff. And before you do that, answer the questions. What are the 5 words about how you want to be perceived by those you serve? And what 5 aspects of your personality do you want to convey to them? And then once you have those words, look at the images. Does it match up? If it doesn't match up, it is either option A, look at your library, see if you have something you can put in that's more appropriate, or B, it's time to give a little ringy-dingy to a photographer and get to work.
Yes, seriously. And, at the end of the day, how often do you think people should be updating their photos?
Well, the first easy one to list would be if you are going through an overall refresh, rebrand of everything. Sure. Another one would be if you have gone through some kind of a life transition, your appearance has changed, or if there's another one is a business transition. You've added a different service that you need to get candid lifestyle shots of to represent it on the service pages and when you talk about it online.
Yeah.
And the other one is a little more, it's an intangible, meaning if you find yourself losing a lot of 50-50 calls from potential clients and you start to think to yourself, well, how can I stop losing these 50-50 calls.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that is not, photos and you're all of a sudden going to start getting more clients. That's not the case, but it is one area that you would it would be in your best interest to start looking at and think about, how are people coming through the front door? Because that's what those photos represent. And if they are not calibrated and aligned with the level of authority that you want to project, it is going to be seen by these people, and it is not necessarily a good result that's going to happen from it.
So all of those are great tips, but I would also just say, at a minimum, at least every 4 to 5 years, right? I mean, even if nothing changes, like you haven't gone through a life change or whatever, but every 4 to 5 years, you don't look the same as you did 4 or 5 years ago. The styles are different. You know, your approach, like the quality of the photos are it's also just going to look sort of stale.
Okay, so let's go by years. Let's go with that instead of those things, which are obviously very important. What I would say is, if you don't really post that much and you do look the same, you're fine for 4 to 5 years. You start posting more consistently. Yes, the images will get, as a matter of fact, one of my retainer clients who I work with him on his storytelling as well as photographing his branding stuff. And eventually I'm going to shoot his new book that's coming out and shooting him on stages, right? I just actually had a talk with the content producer that I work with to put his content together. And I'm like, 25 looks like we're due for a new one, because we post a lot. And, every 2 years for him is what makes sense. The answer is, when you're looking at this stuff, the first thing is you got to give it the sniff test. Like, am I bored with these photos? Like, that matters. And, aside from personality and the looks, and that's all the same.
Right.
Are you bored with them? You know?
Yeah. But I also wanted to underline the part about that you mentioned about, like, what's coming in the front door and what are people saying? Because I know that when I update things and when I had new photos, the things that I was hearing people say in that initial intake call were things like, I saw your website and I just knew you were the right person for me. And they were like, I don't even know what it was. And they're saying, I don't know what it was, but I know what it was. It was tons and tons of hours of refining my message, getting new photos, going and changing all these things and updating things on a regular basis. And it's not magic. It's not like I just kind of send out like vibes into the universe. It's work. This is marketing, it's not. It's none of that. It is real stuff that's getting into people's heads and they don't necessarily feel it. But that's the difference between like those words and the visuals, because the visuals kind of hit you in a different part of your brain where it's like, it's either saying yes or no. And if they are coming in and they're saying yes, and you're the right person, that had something to do with it. And if you're not hearing that, there's probably a problem somewhere with your visuals.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, when I've run into this a lot where people just, they spend all this time and effort on the copy. And then when it comes to picking the photo, it's like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, it's good enough, and it's just like, you don't understand how much impact you're losing on a potential client that could come through the door. Because at the end of the day, the image, and it's what it is with the images, it's that subconscious feeling that they get from you simply based off of the emotion that's conveyed in that image. It's like, I like this person, or get that person the hell away from me. I can never be in that room. You can get that in seconds. Yeah. And that is why images are critical.
I see this all the time with law firms. Well, they will literally spend months fine-tuning the words and whatever, and exactly what you just described. And then the images, and they're like, whatever. Like, my teeth look clean in this one, so let's go with that. And it's like, there's so little thought in what they're doing with those visuals, and they're like destroying all the work. And it's not that the words aren't important, but they don't get to the words first. That's not what is happening first when they land on a website or social media or whatever. The words they're never getting to it, especially if it's social media. They don't even expand to open those words. It's like, does the image land or not? And to bypass that and think that that's less important than your words. It's just kind of wrong.
I mean, we are wired as human beings to make meaning through visuals. That is how it has worked. That is why all of that work that goes into that frame with all of those pixels matters. And unfortunately, sometimes you gotta beat the idea over some people's heads, but eventually they get it. But once they get it, they'll never forget it.
That's so true. I was going to just ask for one big takeaway, but I feel like maybe you have another one, but that was such a good one, that we are so wired to be connected to those visuals. But you have a more specific takeaway to this whole episode that we've been talking about, with all the mistakes, all the bad ideas in the stock photos, all of the stuff that we've covered, excuse me, for a big takeaway for this episode.
I think the big ribbon bow on top of this whole thing is be more intentional about the way you position yourself in your photos. Because if you don't, you are missing out on an opportunity to be able to serve the people who need you the most. Yep. Because it is not their job to find you. It's your job to be discovered by them.
Oh, I love that so much. That was amazing.
I just made that up. I'm glad you liked it.
Well, and it's recorded. So if you want to use that again, you can go back. John DeMato is a visual storyteller and photographer in New York. Thank you so much. That was such a great episode. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you liked it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the CounselCast podcast. Be sure to visit our website at counsel-cast.com for the resources mentioned on the episode and to give us your feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate if you could rate and review the podcast on Apple and subscribe to your favorite podcast platform. See you on the next one.